Okay, hi everybody. So today I wanted to make a video using my Juki 2010Q. It's a TL2010Q machine. I just got it probably about 2 months ago, and I've been making a quilt with it. And today I'm making the quilt sleeve that's going to go on the back of the quilt. And it was a tie quilt, and so I had all these labels that are on the individual ties, and the person I'm making it for wanted me to use the labels, so I'm sewing them onto the sleeve. And so I just wanted to make a video showing the machine. There's not a whole lot of videos out there just, highlighting the machine, so I figured, I'm doing some sewing, might as well go ahead and do a video and show what the machine can do and such. So that's what I'm going to do here. So let me zoom in. There. Alright, so yeah, so I'm just going to start sewing, and you can kind of get a see into what the Juki TL2010Q is like. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches and then back stitch here. It's a very quiet machine. It's not very loud. The table that I'm using is just a plastic fold-up table, so when I start going faster, because the table is not very sturdy, it'll bounce, so the machine will kind of be bouncing along. But that's not the machine's fault, it's my table. So. And the foot that I'm using is just the standard foot. This, I guess you could say, it's the 1/4 inch foot. If you put your fabric right at the outside edge here, it ends up being a 1/4 inch to where the needle goes into the fabric. And today I've got my, just all the settings are basic settings. I'm not using any shortening or lengthening of the stitch. I'm using regular black cotton thread as my thread, my spool, and in my bobbin. The needle that I'm using, I believe, is an 80. So, because the ties that I was working on were silk, and I wanted to, try and minimize the stitch holes that I was putting in the individual ties. So I went ahead and just kept that needle, kept that needle in the whole time. And I'm just making some small adjustments here for the labels. If one's wider than the previous one or smaller, I'm just kind of adjusting it a little bit. So yeah, so far this machine has been a great machine. When I do my stitching on the quilt that I'm working on, I just did stitch in the ditch. I didn't do any free motion quilting because I really wanted to highlight the individual ties and the pattern that I chose. So when I did my quilting, I used a clear monofilament thread, and I was kind of having some issues with that thread. If you've ever used it, you know it's very springy, I guess you could say. If you unwind a cotton thread, it's not going to be too curly. But a monofilament thread, it's very curly. And the Juki has a thread holder stand on the back of it that you put the thread up through, and my thread kept popping out just because it was so curly. So I kept having to, re-wrap it on the thread stand, and I had to wrap it. I actually used both loops on it. But other than that, I've not really had any problems with this machine. It's great. It's a workhorse. I bought it, I upgraded to the Juki from a brother that I had. And the reason why I did it is for the throat space. The brother that I had is just your generic household, domestic machine. and the throat space was, I think, 5 inches by 3 inches, maybe. So, and that sound that you just heard was the automatic cutter, the thread cutter. It is a little bit loud, and it does sound, at first it'll sound, you know, that your machine is having an issue, but it's really not. It's just the thread cutter. It's not very, once you get used to it, it's not too bad. So now I'm just going through and snipping off some of the threads here. My bobbin ran out here, and so I had to start over. I had to close up that stitch and then start again. So now I'm just cutting off any extra little threads. But yeah, you know, I love the Juki. It's definitely been a great upgrade from my brother. I love my brother machine. It's my little workhorse. I still use it for all my zigzag stitches and whatever other decorative stitches I want. This Juki is a straight stitch machine, and what that means is it only goes forwards and backwards. There's no left to right, side to side action. So if you are looking for just a simple workhorse straight stitch machine that you can use for free motion quilting, I highly recommend this Juki. It's been great so far. I haven't had any issues. And I oil it. I oil it about once a week. But if you're doing some major sewing all throughout the week, you definitely want to make sure to oil it, you know, during the week as well, which I did just this past week because I was doing all my quilting, and the quilt that I'm working on is a king size quilt, so I definitely needed to keep this baby nice and greased up. So yeah, so I'll just keep sewing here. I'm just gonna start sewing on my next layer of tie tags. So yeah, I'll just keep the camera rolling and you can keep watching and just kind of see the Juki in action. So I'm just going to start off with a couple of forward stitches. Sometimes it's a little difficult to get my first tag going because it's so tiny. And you got to make sure to get it under that foot. There we go. So start off with a couple of stitches and a little back stitch. There we go. Line it up. I'm just kind of taking my time. I don't want to speed through this. I want to make sure my tags look nice. There you go. And this does come with a knee lever, which I don't have hooked up. I don't really have a good reason other than it's upstairs and I'm not. But I'm looking forward to using that. And all the times I go upstairs I forget to grab it. But one of these days I'm going to grab it and bring it down here so I can actually use it. I've never used a knee lever, but I'm excited to try it out. And once I remember to bring it down, maybe I'll do another video showing the knee lever. One thing I like to talk about, you know, instead of just being completely quiet, when I was doing my binding, I put my binding on my quilts by machine. I don't do any hand sewing. I frankly don't have the patience to do it. But, you know, more power to those of you that do. When I was doing my binding, I originally started using the walking foot that came with the machine, and it's a great foot to use while I was doing Stitch in the Ditch, and I wanted to try it out on my binding, and I found it very difficult to keep a consistent I don't want to say consistent stitch, but a consistent depth maybe on my binding. I liked to keep my stitching on my binding right at the edge, so it's maybe an 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of the quilt, and I found it difficult to keep that measurement with my walking foot. So what I tried, and this machine does come with several different feet, but I didn't really find one that I felt comfortable with using on my binding. But what I did was I actually tried the zipper foot that came with this, and the zipper foot I discovered doesn't hop like this foot. If you watch, you'll see the foot actually goes up and down just a smidge. The zipper foot doesn't. It stays flat. It stays right on the material, keeps it nice and pressed to the bed of the machine. But the zipper foot, I found it made it a bit easier to keep a nice depth on my binding. Just a little thing that I don't know, discovered while I was playing around with my machine. This is the first quilt that I've done with my Juki. So I'm just kind of, you know, messing around and trying things out, trying out different feet just to see which ones I liked and what I could do with each of them. I've never used a zipper foot because I've never attached a zipper to anything. So I didn't know that they didn't hop, but I do now. And again, back to the knee lever, it would definitely come in handy because, as you can see, I'm picking up my foot every time I'm adding in a new little label, and I imagine the knee lever would probably save me some time, but again, it's way upstairs and I'm not, so chalk it up to laziness. I'm coming down to the end of my labels. I've got just a few more left, and I'm hoping it'll work out perfectly and my labels will end right at the end of my sleeve, so we shall see. I guess I could take that back on what I said earlier, how I never do any hand sewing. I have to hand sew my sleeve on. If you've ever attached a sleeve to your quilt, you know that it's virtually impossible to attach the sleeve by machine. Unless you have a pattern that it just works out where you can do it, then hey, great, and that's awesome that you were able to figure that out. I haven't. This one, I'm not, I have to hand sew it on. Yeah. We're almost done. We got 3 labels left. And these are smaller, just a little bit. There we go, and here's the last label. Let's see if I can't get that in there. And you can see this is pretty thin. This is maybe, I don't know, not quite a 1/2 inch. One more, here we go. There we go, cut my thread. bam, done. Well, done with that stitch. I still have to go in and stitch down the front, but yeah, you see it. Well, you can't really see because I'm using black thread, but it has a beautiful stitch. You can see it a little bit here in the white. Yep, I did have to tinker a little bit with the thread tension when I first started using it. I did tighten up my bobbin tension just a smidge because it was a little too tight. I don't know if anyone has a bobbin that you can tighten the tension on. I'm sure you've seen videos on how to tighten that, and you know, they say put the bobbin in your hand and pull the string or the thread out, and if you know, if the bobbin sits in your hand but you can still pull the thread out, then that's a good tension. In mine, the bobbin was suspended in the air, and even when I kind of jiggled it down a little bit, it still wasn't coming out, so I did have to adjust it just a little bit. So now I'm going to sew the other side. If I can get this to lay straight. There we go. Alright. And I turned it around because I don't know if you can really tell. Let me try and zoom in. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Well, probably not. So I'll zoom back out. The light in here, it's a great light, but on this side of the foot, in my little groove, there's no shadow. So it's just straight light on this side of the foot. But on this side of the foot, there's just a hint of a shadow of the foot itself. So you can't really see, especially if you're working black on black fabric, it's hard to see where that fabric is. So I flipped it around just so I can see without a shadow. But if you're not working with, you know, I guess precision-like things like what I am, then it's not that big of a deal. I'm just going to move this over a smidge because this label's bigger. There we go. And I'm not zipping through, again, just because I'm kind of doing small precision sewing here. I want to make sure everything stays nice and neat. Put up a little bit. And I'm just sewing on the very edges of these labels. And then what I'll do is once I finish sewing this end of the labels on, I'm going to go ahead and sew my sleeve closed. And then for that, I'll go faster, and then you can see the machine going at, you know, a higher speed. There we go. Beautiful.